Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King. To our viewers in the United States and around the world, thank you for sharing your Sunday. The senseless massacre in New Zealand stirs a global debate about hate, racism, and the internet. President Trump condemns the murders, but draws criticism for what he didn't say and for ignoring the facts when asked if he sees white nationalism as a rising threat.
I don't really. I think it's a small group of people that have very, very serious problems. I guess if you look at what happened in New Zealand, perhaps that's a case. I don't know enough about it yet. They're just learning about the person and the people involved. But it's certainly a terrible thing, terrible thing.
Plus, the president ignores a mini Republican revolt and issues his first veto, vowing broad and bipartisan opposition in Congress won't stop him from building a border wall.
Congress's vote to deny the crisis on the southern border is a vote against reality. It's against reality. It is a tremendous national emergency. It is a tremendous crisis. Congress has the freedom to pass this resolution, and I have the duty to veto it, and I'm very proud to veto it.
And the historically diverse 2020 Democratic field keeps growing, including a new official entry just today. New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand dropped the exploring label just an hour ago.
We need to remember what it feels like to be brave. We launched ourselves into space and landed on the moon. If we can do that, we can definitely achieve universal health care. We can provide paid family leave for all, end gun violence, pass a Green New Deal, get money out of politics, and take back our democracy. None of this is impossible.
With us this Sunday to share their reporting and their insights, Julie Hirschfeld-Davis with the New York Times, CNN's Madhu Raju, Tolu Olorunnipa of the Washington Post, and Lisa Lera of the New York Times. We begin this Sunday with New Zealand's pain and the resulting global conversation about hate and violence. 50 people senselessly shot and killed attending Friday prayers at two mosques, a roughly equal number wounded. New Zealand will debate new gun laws now, as it also debates, as have other communities around the world, how and why.
New Zealand is united in its grief, and we are united in our grief. And so I convey that message of love and support on behalf of New Zealand to all of you. This is not New Zealand.
As Prime Minister Ardern leads the healing in New Zealand, she finds herself at odds with the President of the United States.
He asked what offer of support the United States could provide. My message was sympathy and love for all Muslim communities.
President Trump said in the Oval Office a few minutes ago that he did not think white supremacy worldwide was a problem that was rising in any way. Do you agree with him?
No.
The statistics prove the Prime Minister right and the President very, very wrong on the question of whether far-right extremism is in bloom or in decline. And once again, with the issue of tolerance front and center, so too is the character of the American president. He did strongly condemn the murders and rebuked evil in sacred places of worship. And so his aides bristle at talks. He again fell short. But the president again passed up a chance to specifically call out white nationalism. And none of his statements condemned anti-immigrant sentiment or specifically offered support, what the prime minister called sympathy and love for Muslims. And after offering his condolences to New Zealand, the president moved on to the issue at hand for him, his border wall. And in doing so, used a word also found in the shooting suspect's racist manifesto, railing against immigrants.
People hate the word invasion, but that's what it is. It's an invasion of drugs and criminals and people. We have no idea who they are. In many cases, they're stone-cold criminals.
And so here we are, and the president's aides say, wait a minute. He condemned it. He reached out to the prime minister. The president's critics say, where was an embrace of Muslims? Where was some act to show that you support Muslims here in America? Why, they would say, did you use? The president says he's calling it like he sees it when it comes to immigration. Others say that's code. Those are code words, and he should know better.
Well, I mean, it's not only is it a code word, but it was a code word that was in this manifesto. You might think that the president might just steer clear of that word for maybe a day or a couple of days, knowing that that is a term that the shooter used in this case to sort of justify this horrific act against Muslims in New Zealand. I mean, So I think what we have, though, is a president who feels like every time something like this happens, he's going to get blamed. It's not fair. And he refuses to do what other presidents of pretty much either party, any background would have done in this case, which is to sort of make sure that they touch all the bases. And frankly, maybe it's not sincere, but they would just make sure that they said, this is not something that anyone in the United States agrees with, that we feel solidarity with this community that's been attacked. We feel solidarity with the country. I think he feels like that would be that it's a personal affront to him, and he's not willing to do that in this case. And you heard in those comments, he didn't even acknowledge that this was an example of white nationalism. Right. He said, we don't know yet. We know pretty much enough about what had happened, and he knew by then for sure. He's the president of the United States. He has access to a lot of intelligence. It was pretty well established by then what the motivations of this person were. The fact that he wasn't even willing to say that really tells you that he feels this more personally than he does as a president.
He should know about the specific incident, and he should know the statistics, which are just indisputable here in the United States and around the world. And yet he says, no, not really.
Yeah, he views everything as a zero-sum game, essentially. He believes if he goes after white supremacy, white nationalism, it'll take away from his argument against immigration. He wants to be keep the focus on crimes created by undocumented immigrants, downplay crimes created by white supremacists. Yeah, you mentioned the statistics. It's very clear that white supremacy is in the rise. The Anti-Defamation League said, in 2017, white supremacist murders more than doubled in 2017. We know that white supremacists have been behind some of the most horrific killings, things in Charlottesville, of course, the Tree of Life Synagogue, dating back to 2012, the Oak Creek Massacre and the Sikh Gurdwara in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, in addition to what happened in Charleston, South Carolina, the church there. The president has time and again passed up opportunities to go after white supremacists. Instead, he wants to keep the focus strictly on immigrants.
But I think what's so striking here is the president does call out hate. He just calls out very specific kinds of hate. After the Pittsburgh massacre at the synagogue, he talked about anti-Semitism. When Coptic Christians were killed in Egypt a few years ago, he talked about violence against Christians. He just doesn't seem to express sympathy when it's Muslims who are killed or immigrants or white nationalists are involved. And it's hard not to see some kind of political argument and political choices being made in those decisions, in terms of what massacres you call out. A lot of bad things happen in the world, of course, right? And the president is clearly making choices about which groups he is going to express empathy for.
And one of the issues is, you mentioned the point, there are just some things people expect of a president. Either because they believe it in their heart or they know it's the right thing to do. George W. Bush believed it in his heart. I was covering the White House in those days, went to a mosque after 9/11, thought it was critically important to stand with the Muslim community and say, look, these are isolated actors. They're bad actors. We're going to find them and get them. But this is not Islam. Islam is a religion of peace and faith. The president should know that he has a higher burden here because of his history.
If you have people coming out of mosques with hatred and with death in their eyes and on their minds, we're going to have to do something. I think Islam hates us. There's something there that there's a tremendous hatred there.
You have to deal with the mosques, whether we like it or not. I mean, these attacks aren't coming out of, they're not done by Swedish people.
Again, Trump aides will say this is unfair. Why would you do this? It is his history, and you have to know your history when you're at a moment of challenge and crisis.
Yeah, and this is a president who has followed through with those sentiments with public policy. I mean, he tried to push through a Muslim ban. He ran on the idea of a Muslim ban. He got into office and put one of his first executive orders sort of restricting travel by people from majority Muslim countries. So this is not something that the president has recanted, or he hasn't gone back or apologized for any of those past statements. There's no reason to believe that he doesn't still believe that Islam hates America. He actually makes a number of statements that sort of indicate that he still believes that. And I think that's the way that we should look at his handling of this issue and other issues, is that he sort of has this deep-seated belief that, Muslims hate America. And he said it in the past. He has not said anything to make us think differently. And that's why he finds it so difficult to sort of do what we've seen other presidents do, which is sort of talk about how, one isolated event does not mean that, an entire religion hates the country. And I think that's part of the reason why he's being isolated. And you're seeing the New Zealand prime minister say that she does not agree with him when he makes his comments about white supremacy and on Islam.
And here's an example of how it could be done. Pete Buttigieg, he's running for the Democratic presidential nomination. He's also the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, wrote an open letter to the Muslim community in his city. As you gather this evening, I write to tell you that this city is absolutely committed to your safety and well-being. I want you to know that this entire city has its arms around you in love and peace, and that we support you as you practice your faith here in this community, our community, this home we share. You are our teachers and our doctors, our neighbors and our friends. We all live here as one.
That's a pretty straightforward
approach.
statement. Yeah, it's hard to find a contrast that would be more stark than what he said versus how the president has handled this.
And Democrats clearly want to seize on these moments to show the country that there is a different way, that they could, that there's a way that could be more unifying. I think when the president is making these statements, he is thinking about his base. And it's not that his base is white supremacist. It's that his base, there is a significant portion of his base, polling has shown this, that are worried about the changing demographics of the country, that are deeply worried about immigration. And so there is some connection there with his political support.
Yes, I think the word is leadership. Next, President Trump's first veto. He wants his border wall and is willing to risk a Republican family feud to get it. The first veto of the Trump presidency now on the books, meaning Congress will not stop the White House from taking money meant for other projects and using it to instead build a border wall. The courts might yet stop the president. A coalition of 20 states is challenging his declaration of a national emergency. Their case tracks the separation of powers argument heard from the 12 Republicans who risked the president's ire with Senate votes to reverse the emergency decree.
As we all learned in high school, our government has a system of checks and balances. Congress, not the president, has the sole authority to determine how to spend taxpayer money.
It's a question about the balance of power that is core to our Constitution. This is not about the president.
We must stand up and defend Congress's institutional powers.
This check on the executive is a source of our freedom. This declaration is a dangerous precedent.
The House and then the Senate votes are a rebuke of the president, and aides describe him as angry at the Republicans who, in his view, forced him to use his veto powers. He flashed some of that anger in tweets this past week, but not at his Friday veto event.
I put no pressure on anybody. I actually said I could have gotten some of them to come along. I said, I want you to vote your heart, do what you want to do. I'm not putting any pressure. I'll let them know when there's pressure, okay? And I told them that. So when I need your vote, I'm going to let you know. I didn't need the vote because we all knew it was going to be a veto, and they're not going to be able to override.
They're not going to be able to override, so we'll see how this one plays out in the courts. But how significant is the Republican fracturing? Is it isolated on this? And you also had the Yemen war powers, more anger at Saudi Arabia than anything else resolution. Is that it? We're done, move on? Or is there a festering fissure in the Republican Party?
I think it's issue by issue. I don't think this is a part of a larger revolt within the Republican Party. We've seen this happen time and again where there are things that the president does and you see Congress come back and push back last year, and the way he refused to blame the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, for the murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Afterwards, the Senate and that moved forward and passed a resolution singling out MBS for blame, essentially rebuking the president. Similarly here, you saw a pushback on the Yemen vote to pull back from the U.S. involvement in the Saudi-led war in Yemen. The president's going to have to veto that in the coming days. Here on the wall, not necessarily about the wall, but about the way the president did it. That's what forced Republicans to defect. A lot of the ones, the 12 who did not like the way that he, not the way they believe that this does not pass constitutional muster. But look at who did vote for this. Republican senators in tough races and ended up voting for this. Tom Tillis reversed his position. Now, then he supported the president on this, as did Cory Gardner in a tough race, Martha McSally, who's going to be in a tough race. So that tells you a lot.
Afraid of losing the Republican base, afraid of having a Republican family feud in a tight election where you need every Republican vote. Just to that point, Susan Collins, the only Republican senator up in 2020, her state more moderate than most of the others, the only Republican senator up in 2020 to vote yes. Everybody else, you notice Tom Tillis, who had written this op-ed, saying, I'm a man of principle, I can't vote for this, then voted for it, seeing 2020 there. For the Republicans who voted yes, the question is, how much has Trump changed your party? Because a little back in time, when Barack Obama was in the White House, this executive overreach was a bad thing.
I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward.
Imposing his will unilaterally may seem tempting,
It may serve him politically in the short term, but he knows it will make an already broken system even more broken.
Not how democracy is supposed to work, Leader McConnell said then.
Yeah, and Leader McConnell also even more recently said that he did not think that a national emergency was the way to go, and he flipped and changed his mind. And we've seen a number of Republicans sort of flip just within the last few months, of saying something a few weeks ago and now saying that they're okay with the national emergency declaration. It's clear that this is Trump's party, and even though he said, I didn't put any pressure on these Republicans, that's not the case. I mean, he sent Vice President Mike Pence to the Hill. He was tweeting about, how all these various Republicans needed to not think about constitutionality and just vote for the wall. So he was putting pressure on these Republicans. He flipped a few of them, but it was a big embarrassment for him.
And it is his party. So let me ask this question and play this from the former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld. Does somebody like this have a prayer in challenging the president, or is it just important for Republicans having this debate about what happens after Trump, whether that's in 2 years or 4 years or 6 years? Does Bill Weld have a prayer?
I don't think the president is knowledgeable on any of these issues. He simply repeats his buzzwords. Now, it's not entirely his fault. Before he was elected president of the United States, he was a New York City and Palm Beach socialite, judging beauty contests and employed in the reality TV industry. That's no preparation, with all respect, for being president of the United States.
There are a lot of Republicans who, whether it's this issue of executive power, whether it's the trade issue, whether it's NATO alliance and issues like that, who don't like this president. The question is, you can weaken a president, an incumbent president with a primary challenge, even if you fail. Is that where we're going here?
I mean, look, I think it's really hard to see a viable pathway for a Republican to primary the president right now. I mean, of course, a lot of investigations going on. There's a special counsel report. Who knows what's going to come? But part of the problem is not only is the president very popular with the base, it's that, Governor Weld and Governor Hogan, who people talk a lot about primarying, they're out of step with where the party is now. I sat down with for an interview with Hogan a couple weeks back, and he was saying that he thinks Roe v. Wade was correctly decided. That's not a view that wears well with the Republican base. So there's a number of issues there. But I do think what you are starting to see is Republicans in the party, generally those in safe seats, starting to think about what a post-Trump Republican Party looks like. And they know that anything that happens now, Democrats will take advantage of. Jay Inslee, who's running for president, said that he would use emergency declaration to deal with climate change. And that is something that freaks some Republicans out as they look towards the future.
There's an immediate conversation. There's the longer-term conversation. When we come back, Democrats have a brand new 2020 candidate, plus 2 candidates, same issue, somewhat different answers.
There will be a woman on the ticket. I don't know if it's in the vice president's position or the president's position. But if I have my way, there will be a woman on the ticket.
It's hard for me to think of a reason that I would not do that. I think talking about who I would pick as vice president just feels really premature.
Night at 9.
Will Brave win? Well, it hasn't always, and it isn't right now. Brave doesn't pit people against each other. Brave doesn't put money over lives. Brave doesn't spread hate, cloud truth, build a wall.
Children can be separated and sent.
That's what fear does. We need to remember what it feels like to be brave.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York making it real just 90 minutes ago, moving from exploring a run to officially in the 2020 Democratic nomination chase. The field is crowded and diverse in many ways. Let's take a look. Number one, just take a look here. Historic number of women. You have African-American candidates. You have a gay man, Asian candidates, young and old here as we go through this field. Maybe you're into political geography. These candidates come from just about everywhere, every region of the United States. Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, for example. Some in the Northeast, goes across the country. And there's more to come. Another way to look at it, the age of these candidates. We have 2 candidates in their 30s, all the way over to Bernie Sanders in his 70s. Joe Biden, if he jumps in as anticipated, would join Senator Sanders here, 60s, 50s, 40s. You have age diversity in the Democratic field as well. How about the question of elected office experience? 2 candidates, Marianne Williamson, Andrew Yang, never been elected in politics. Elizabeth Warren, John Delaney, Pete Buttigieg in the 5-year area. Bernie Sanders way over there at 30 years again. Joe Biden, if he gets in, would be over there. So you have age diversity, ethnic diversity, diversity of all stripes here, if you look at the field. Now, Gillibrand's official entry today comes days after Beto O'Rourke joined the race with a big 3-day Iowa swing.
No one left behind, no one counted out, no one taken for granted. Does not matter to me, no me importa, where you live, what party you belong to whom you pray, or who you love, whether you've been here for 6 generations or whether you got here 6 days ago. You are my fellow American.
And so where are we? Let's start with the newest entry, Senator Gillibrand. She was exploring, so it's not a huge step, but she's now officially into the race. What's her lane?
Well, I think she's running as a very woman-first candidate. She's really embraced this mantle of, she's made dealing with sexual assault. She, of course, was the first one to call for Al Franken's ousting. So she's really embraced that history and is running as someone who's going to put issues affecting women front and center. And the political argument for that is that women helped the party win the midterms. There was a record number of female candidates, female campaign managers, women were the volunteers. So the argument there is that she wants to tap into the power that drove the party to reclaim the House in the midterms and sees a lane there. It's probably a crowded lane, but that's sort of where she's placed.
She's going to have to answer for some of her liabilities, too. When she was a House member, she was much more conservative when she represented upstate New York than when she became the New York senator. Much more progressive record. She has made sexual assault a major issue. She's dealing with the controversy in her own office on how she dealt with a sexual harassment allegation. She said that it was handled appropriately. There will be questions about that, questions about her record, and we'll see how the voters ultimately respond.
And it's interesting in that you could say, well, you explored for a few months and you didn't get a lot of traction in the polls. Why would you do this? I think a lot of these candidates, and it's the right assumption, let's try to raise money. Let's stay in the race. We're going to get to debates. We're going to have a crowded field. We're going to get to debates. Somebody is going to have a breakthrough moment in those debates. One of the, call it second tier or third tier. I don't know how to rank the candidates right now. Somebody will have a breakthrough. A lot of the focus this past week was on Beto O'Rourke, the former congressman, got in 3 days in Iowa. I don't mean this to be snarky, but a lot of people are saying because he's unemployed, he gets to continue. And he continues. He's out in the Midwest. He's continued to campaign in Wisconsin, Ohio. Some of the others, the senators have to come back and cast votes and the like. The reaction to Beto O'Rourke has been really interesting, and it's polarized. We were talking before the show. This is Kathleen Parker. I love reading Kathleen Parker. This is in the Washington Post. If you support Beto O'Rourke, you're not going to like this. No one in recent memory, save for Donald Trump, has received so much free advertising by simply showing up. When he flails his arms, often in front of his own face, he reminds mothers everywhere of the moment when an infant suddenly realizes that the hand bobbing in front of his nose belongs to him, whereupon he remains mesmerized until he realizes there's another one. Ouch.
Well, he does not remind me of my children, but I will say, it has been interesting how very kind of divided the reaction has been to him. People seem to either really love this brand of almost kind of Obama-esque, performance that he does in front of a crowd, or hate it and think that it's very self-important and it doesn't really speak to any of the issues that, Democrats frankly want to be getting down to brass tacks on because they want so badly to beat Donald Trump in 2020. I think that polarization is going to continue. I think the interesting thing is going to be how he fills in some of the blanks. Lisa said earlier he's been kind of gauzy about, some of his policy prescriptions. I think that, Democrats are going to need to see what the specifics are on some of these grand ideas that he's out there talking about in very inspirational ways. And that's part of the reason that people are so taken up with, and I think in his Senate run in Texas, we're so taken up with who this guy is and sort of like the cult of his personality. There's going to need to be more of that, more than that. But I think that's why we see some of the divides right now. A lot of Democrats are really just fed up with this idea that you're going to have this guy making grand gestures, however big or small, and that there's not going to be anything behind that. I think that's the big worry right now.
And he's also shifting a little bit on policy. When he was running for Senate, he said he would be for the Bernie Sanders Medicare for All bill. Now he's talking a little bit about a different bill that would allow people to buy into Medicare or people to keep their private insurance. So he's sort of shifting on that. He said before that he thought impeachment was a good idea. He seems to be walking that back a little bit. So it does seem like he's sort of trying to mold himself into a little bit more moderate stances, even though he still wants to be seen as a progressive. But it'll be really interesting to see where he lands on some of these policy issues where he's been on
and the party
sides.
is having this very active conversation around race and gender right now. And he is a white guy in the most historically diverse field in American history. So that is something that we've seen him even the first few days have to deal with. And, he's talked about whether his wife, he's had to already dial back a comment about his wife being home with the kids. And you've seen some sort of subtle shade thrown at him by other candidates. So that is a dynamic here. And it really cuts both ways. There are people, Democrats, who really want a diverse ticket. And there are Democrats who most Democrats really want to beat Trump. And there are Democrats who will quietly tell you, very quietly, that they're worried that a more diverse ticket would have a harder time because of all these biases of beating Trump. So it's a real issue that people are grappling with.
And central to that question is there a front runner? And if there is one, it would be Joe Biden. We assume he's going to get in. And he sort of, is this a real slip or was this on purpose?
I'm told I get criticized by the New Left. I have the most progressive record of anybody running for the if anybody who would run. I didn't mean with anybody who would run.
That's home in Delaware last night. So that's a crowd that loves Joe Biden. It's a crowd that wants Joe Biden to run. You could see him there. He knows that people are coming after things he said in the 70s and the 80s because he's been in politics for so long. There were some things he has said that are out of step with today's Democratic Party. But that was him saying, hey, wait a minute, I was Barack Obama's vice president. I have evolved with the party and the country. If I run, what was that?
I mean, I think this, color me cynical. I think that this was obviously
Let's end the charade, Joe. Is that what
and he wanted to make it clear that he is going to fight back and try to claim the progressive mantle. And by suggesting, this was a slip up, he knew that this is probably going to get a lot of attention. Look, that is going to be the fight going forward. Is he progressive enough for today's Democratic Party? He has a lot of things in his past he'll have to answer for, his role in Anita Hill, his role in the 1994 crime bill, among many other things. But as you mentioned, he was Barack Obama's vice president. He was out front on gay marriage, and the president, and Obama was. He can fight on those issues. But the question will ultimately be, is this new Democratic Party ready for it?
To that point, your colleague Jonathan Martin is a co-author of a smart piece today about the Democrats, the age question. Do you want somebody new and young? Democrats traditionally nominate the younger next generation candidate. Chris Murphy, Democratic Senator from Connecticut, smartly quoted in the piece, I would generally make the case that the Democratic Party should always be nominating the next generation candidate, except I'm not sure any of the old rules apply. And that's one of the things. In the age of Trump, and after we elected our first African-American president, a lot of people are thinking the way, this is how it happens. Well, forget how it happens. We're in a new world we don't know.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the great thing about that piece is it points out this sort of dilemma that Democrats are having of, do you want to fall in love with someone? Do you want to love the idea and think that the person's inspirational? Or do you actually want to find someone who you think has the very best chance of beating President Trump in 2020? And maybe that's not the same person, right?
We'll give every Democratic activist a home version of the magic wall. They can do their own electoral map and try to sort this out themselves. All right. It's a lot of fun. It's fascinating. Up next, waiting for the Mueller report and the tweets that tell you who sounds more than a little anxious.
Now cleans itself.
As all of Washington waits for the Mueller report, the person with the most at stake isn't trying to hide his anxiety or his anger. Friday morning tweet raging from President Trump, including calling the special counsel investigation illegal. Robert Mueller, the president, says, quote, should never have been appointed, and, quote, there should be no Mueller report. The president's anger related to the Mueller investigation and beyond continues throughout the weekend. Yesterday, tweeting this about the dossier and connecting it to the late Senator John McCain. Spreading the fake and totally discredited dossier, unfortunately a very dark stain against John McCain. He had far worse stains than this, including thumbs down and repeal and replace after years of campaigning to repeal and replace. Just moments ago, on this Sunday morning, the president continuing, so it was indeed, just proven in court papers, last in his class, Annapolis, John McCain, who sent the fake dossier to the FBI and the media, hoping to have it printed before the Dems.
Wow.
Yeah, it's you may have grievances against Senator McCain, but he's a hero. He's been dead for 7 months.
Saying last in his class, that's stunning. And also,
let me stop you for 1 second.
Yes.
This is a president who's consistently refused to release his own grades. If you want to bring up others, maybe you should give us yours.
Exactly. And also, he's frankly passing on false claims and lies about John McCain on several fronts. He's almost making it seem like that John McCain was responsible for the Russia investigation. That's not what happened in the way that his involvement in the dossier, which is pretty limited, to suggest as the president is suggesting here. Also saying that he was responsible yesterday for scuttling the repeal and replace effort. That's not what happened at all. What happened was that he was one of the senators who voted against advancing a very narrow repeal plan of the Obamacare, very narrow. They were nowhere near on a replacement. They couldn't even necessarily get that narrow plan through Congress because they had to still conference that with the House. But details aside, he still is going after him, and he's also going after, quote, his many, quote, stains. This is someone who has been revered by both parties, who was hailed after his death as a war hero. The president can't let it go.
Yeah, and it'd be interesting. Again, normally when the president does this, you get crickets from the Republican Party. It'd be interesting to see if somebody stands up and says, really? Meghan McCain did stand up yesterday, tweeting, "No one will ever love you the way they loved my father. I wish I had been given more Saturdays with him. Maybe spend yours with your family instead of being on Twitter obsessing over mine."
It does sort of beg the question, what is the president doing all weekend? Is he sitting at home in the White House watching TV and getting riled up about, what he believes to be fake news and persecution from prosecutors, and why he's not sort of taking a more presidential, approach? I mean, this is someone who has access to, the best scholars and the best experts on any issue that you could imagine. And he could, have dinner with the top leaders of the world. But instead, it seems that he's watching TV and getting, emotional about the Russia investigation and not focusing on the things that matter to the country.
And the anger, we were talking about the tweets about Senator McCain, which are just incomprehensible in the sense that I understand you're mad. He voted against you on health care. Okay. It's a long time ago. Move on. He was an American hero. But the Mueller anger, again, it's not new, but that it came up Friday again, illegal, should never have been appointed. There is anticipation the Mueller report could come any day now. Does the president know more than we know, or is that just he's trying to, again, stoke his base so that if there's something damaging in it, his attitude is don't believe it?
Well, I mean, I think that's part of it, right? But I do think that both in the tweets about John McCain and in this sort of renewed sense of anger and panic about Mueller, what you see is that he really does feel under siege. I mean, I think part of this is definitely he's talking to the base by bringing up John McCain. I think part of that is talking to the very conservative Republican base that never liked John McCain, that thought that John McCain, lost an election, and threw away an election. But I do think a lot of it is very personal to him, and the fact that he feels under siege and he sees this in very black and white terms, very simplistic terms that have nothing to do with the actual details of how the dossier came forward, nothing to do with the actual substance of what Mueller is investigating, but just very black and white. They're after me, they're coming to get me, and I'm hitting back. And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing here. And he knows, of course, as the rest of us, are gathering, that like Mueller is wrapping things up, and this is going to be the time when he is feeling most under threat, and rightly so.
So his former campaign chairman gets sentenced additionally 7.5 years. So Paul Manafort will spend time in jail. Saw some court developments. All right, we'll see what happens in the week ahead. Our reporters share from their notebooks next, including the House Speaker's next battle, trade. But first, Nancy Pelosi's unique take on today, St. Patrick's Day.
Most of us were in school with Irish Catholic nuns who taught us about the Kennedys and the Irish American contribution. And St. Patrick's Day was a very important day to us. It was important because we were honoring St. Patrick, but as an Italian American, I was always taught that St. Patrick was Italian.
3700.
Let's head one more time around the Inside Politics table. Ask our great reporters to share a little something from their notebooks, get you out ahead of the big political news just around the corner. Julie?
Well, Senator Mitch McConnell set the stage last week for a debate on the Green New Deal in the Senate before the end of the month. I think we all can stipulate that there is not going to be a large new Green New Deal package that becomes law this year, but this is going to be the forum for a big politically charged debate over what the priorities are, whether the two parties think that climate change is real and what we should do about it. There's obviously a ton of energy on the Democratic side and in the Democratic primary around this issue, and Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, has decided to just lean into this. But this is going to be a very difficult debate for Democrats who now have to decide what to do about a plan that a lot of their candidates have embraced, but the specifics of which are a little bit more politically difficult. They're talking about all voting present potentially and voting for, and they've put out a resolution just basically declaring that climate change is real, which is a bare minimum. But Democrats are going to have to figure out what they are for before this vote takes place.
It's going to be a lot of fun. A debate worth having. We'll see how it plays out. Manu?
John, there's not going to be much bipartisan legislating in this divided Congress, but there's one issue that has somewhat of a chance. That's to deal with the revised NAFTA agreement that the president has put forward. The U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer has been moving behind the scenes and meeting with House Democrats to try to alleviate their concerns. And the big question going forward is how does that Nancy Pelosi deal with this? She, in a closed-door meeting last week, I'm told she raised concerns about environmental protections, labor protections in dealing with opioids. She also raised concerns about the president's remarks about walking away from the NAFTA deal in that closed-door meeting. For Pelosi, the big question going forward is, what do you do here? Do you get behind a potential bipartisan win, give the president a bipartisan win, something that he could campaign on going into the 2020 elections, or do you raise concerns and dig in about the issues that you're concerned about and try to fight it and take it to the voters going forward? Still a lot of questions about whether Republicans could get behind it, whether it could pass the Senate, but Pelosi's decision critical about when she'll get behind it, if she'll get behind it, or if she'll fight it.
Politics of trade, a lot of fun. We'll watch this one. Tolu?
I spoke to Mayor Pete Buttigieg a couple of days ago, and it was really interesting that he said that he wants to speak more about his religious faith as part of the Democratic primary. He wants to promote that and talk a little bit more about religion. You're hearing more about this from Democrats, including Senator Cory Booker, Senator Kamala Harris, even Senator Bernie Sanders, going to churches, talking about faith and sort of talking about the 2020 election as a battle for the soul of America. It gives them an opportunity to draw a contrast with President Trump, who gets a lot of support from specifically white evangelical voters, but does not sort of personally come across as someone who's pious. And I think Democrats are thinking that they can dig into some of President Trump's support by talking about their own personal faith and talking about how the faith of their personal politics can translate into their policy platform as well.
Well, another interesting wrinkle in a very interesting Democratic race. Lisa?
So we spent some time on this show talking about Beto O'Rourke. I'm leaving from this table and going to see another presidential candidate, Elizabeth Warren, who will be in Memphis and then Mississippi before doing a CNN town hall tomorrow night. And in a way, she's sort of like the anti-Beto. And the contrast between Senator Warren and Mr. O'Rourke, I think, illustrates a lot of the choices faced by Democratic primary voters. It's generational. He's quite a bit younger than her. It's policy. She's really led the field in policy specifics, coming out this weekend with a plan on housing, last weekend with a plan on breaking up tech companies. He's taken some criticism for being a little gauzier about where he stands on different policies. And it's vision. He's really talked a lot about coming together, and she's really been focused on naming what she sees as the people holding back progress, the ultra wealthy, big corporations. So the contrast between those candidates will really tell us a lot about where Democratic primary voters are going forward.
That's what makes the race so much fun, even though it's early. I'll close with what you might call deja vu all over again for Republicans in Alabama. It was a Republican mess, you will remember, back in 2017 that helped Democrat Doug Jones to his stunning win in a special Senate election. Jones is now running for a full term in 2020 and is the most vulnerable incumbent Democrat. Establishment Republicans recruited GOP Congressman Bradley Byrne to run and are betting Alabama will be extra red in a presidential year. But their hope that Byrne would get a clear shot is fading. The party's controversial 2017 candidate, former state Supreme Court Chief Justice